Everyone. We hope you and your families are doing good. As we said yesterday, this is a good signal that you are in this session because you are working.
Sí.
So please stay safe. As we mentioned yesterday, at IncomeX Cloud, we are very committed to bring valuable solutions to our resellers and MSPs to help the end customers. In this bootcamp, we are receiving the knowledge from the specialist. And today we will continue with a deep dive on the technical aspects of Fly, the migration tool from Avepoint. Yesterday, we had a great session with Scott Sackett, where we learned what is Fly and what it can do to migrate from different sources to Office 365. Today, we have a 2-hour session. Please let me know any question you may have through the chat, and I will be more than happy to help Kyle to answer all the questions. So Kyle Johnston, he's a partner technical specialist from Avepoint, and he will conduct the session today. Welcome, Kyle, and go ahead.
Good morning, everybody, and happy Friday. I'm just going to start off here with a quick presentation I built out, just kind of going over the steps of setting up the product and what to expect. And after that, I'll go ahead and dive right into the actual product, and we can go over a quick demo and how everything works. And then from there, if you have any questions, let me know and go ahead and cover all of those. So today, here's the agenda. This is just from setup all the way to the ending, the post-migration process, as well as any questions you may have. So what is Fly? Fly is a migration tool. We went over this more in detail yesterday. The licensing, how to get it yourself, and what the process is like for a first-time user. More details on that. You briefly discussed it yesterday in regards to the installation process. You got to actually install it. It's currently not cloud-based, although we do have other solutions and things upon that. We're mainly focusing on Fly migration today. So the installation process, essentially we have a manager and agent that's going to be installed. You can do it all on one machine, which is a simple install. It'll ask you, as you see in the bottom left, do you want to configure a simple install or do you want to install just a manager or agent? You can scale out agents to have more agents to split the load if you have a bigger migration or do anything like that. When doing the install, it'll go ahead and do a pre-scan and make sure everything's available. And then if you have anything missing that needs to be installed for this, you can go ahead and select the fix button, and that'll go ahead and fix that for you, and then you can go ahead and rescan it right after that and make sure that's fully installed. Once you get our product installed, you're going to want to make sure you apply that license just to ensure that we can get that migration going. When you default install it, it should have a trial. And that way you can actually test the product, as Scott mentioned yesterday. If you want to do a pre-migration report or anything like that, just to kind of see what environment you're working with if you're unable to get that through Office 365 for some reason. Once you go ahead and get that license applied, the first step is you're going to want to go ahead and add any service accounts and app profiles you have. The service accounts you're going to make sure you add for all environments, whereas the app profile you want to make sure you add for any Office 365 environment, just to help with performance as well as any throttling issues you may come across, as that's a big thing within migration. After that, we're going to go ahead and start building out any connections you have. This will actually be adding the environments themselves with the service accounts you created. Under the connection manager, you'll be able to add each and every connection you have here, depending on the different environment type and what kind of migration you're looking. We went over all the types yesterday. We have from SharePoint, File System, Exchange, G Suite, Groups and Teams, Slack, Box, and Dropbox. Once you go ahead and get those connections built, this is where you actually start building out the migration planners itself. First, you're going to select the source, then the destination. After that, you're going to start setting up all the mappings and scope. There are multiple different ways to do that. We'll get more into that when we're actually doing the demo itself. There are different methods such as drag and drop, and import, export of an Excel sheet. And then beyond that, you're going to go ahead and select the settings you want of that job. From there, you're going to go ahead and start running the migration plan itself. You can build out multiple different plans and kind of put them into a plan of its own just to make them run back to back, or as well, you can just kick them off right then if you want to do one bigger plan. Kind of see here, we have the migration status on the side as well as the migration tab. The migration tabs are going to be where you actually build the plans. The migration status is where you're going to be able to see everything that's running and what's going on with it. Once you go ahead and finish running that, you're going to be able to check that migration status page to see everything what's happened. Majority of any issues you run into in migrations are generally permission based, so we can always download a job report and logs to give us more information on this, as well as you can actually view a summary of the job within the migration status. You can click the little eyeball icon and that will bring up this migration details here. You can see the successful objects, the failed objects, the time ran, and all that kind of information, as well as the more detailed information. You're actually going to download those details and logs here. And then we can go ahead and hop into a demo. I'll go ahead and pull up that product. Just switch over here. And then, are you able to see the actual migration page here? I just want to confirm, Marlene.
Yes.
All right, perfect. So this is the landing page as Scott showed you yesterday. Once you have everything installed, from the very beginning, like I mentioned, you're just going to go ahead and come down here into management, and this has a lot of the beginning setup stages. You can go over here to license manager, ensure that you do have your license code. When you purchase, you should receive a license code from your partner, and you can come in here and just apply that license code. And then one thing you're going to want to make sure you do after you do that is actually click apply at the bottom. Sometimes many people forget to do that, and just helps to make sure you ensure that you get that fully in here and you can see everything saved in here. Once you get that done, as discussed, we're going to go ahead and add your service accounts and app profiles. The service accounts are the accounts that are actually used to run the jobs themselves. It's a pretty simple add. All you're going to do is come in here, select add, and you're going to add that username and password. From the app profile, this is more actual Office 365 environment related. So essentially what you're going to do is you're going to add the app profile user. Generally, it's going to be that same service account here that you use for the destination. And you can give it a profile name, like the domain name, that way just to make sure you have everything organized when doing the migrations. You can reference that later. And then you're just going to go ahead and enter the username or email here and click add. And then that's going to redirect you to an Office 365 page just to kind of prove any permissions that we need to make sure we're able to access that Office 365 environment and reduce any throttling issues or anything along those lines. After that, you have the essentials, what we need to actually set up the jobs. That's where we're going to come over here into the connection manager, and this is where you're going to have all your different connections. You have your SharePoint, you have your file system, Exchange, G Suite, groups and teams, Slack, Box, and Dropbox. Once you have those, it's pretty simple to go ahead and add that in here since you've already have all the same information. For SharePoint, you can do each one individually by clicking add, or you can go ahead and do a scan of the entire environment. It makes it a lot easier to add everything. So you come over here, select SharePoint Online, SharePoint On-Premise, depending on what you're coming from and going to. You select Site Collection, Office 365 Group Sites, OneDrive for Business. If you're only doing one, you can select the individual one, or you can select them all if you're going to go ahead and try and add them all in here. Then you go ahead and select that app profile that you added, as well as your service account. And then from there, you can scan the environment and it will show you all right here, all the different items, where from there you can go ahead and select the ones you want to add. You don't have to select them all, or you can go ahead and click add all, and you can add all those, and it'll add them all to your connection manager here. And then file system, you can do the same thing. You can come in here and add it. Essentially, you got the service account, password, or UNC path, as well as exchange. Very similar. You're going to come in here, exchange on-prem, exchange online. You're going to select your service account and password for on-premise, or for online, you're going to add that out profile and service account as we discussed earlier. And then that'll go ahead and add that connection here. And then we also have G Suite. Stick with the Microsoft related products for the moment and go ahead and add that here for groups and teams. Groups and teams is very similar. Add that app profile, service account, password, and then we'll go ahead and add all those groups and teams in here. G Suite, there's generally a little more information you're needed to do those because sometimes you have to add permissions within the actual G Suite tenant itself. But once you get all that added, you could use the private key in there to go ahead and add that connection as well. Once you have all your connections here, the next step really just comes down to creating the migration plans and building those out. So, for example, you can go in here, click Create Plan. I already have 3 different plans already created. Shown previously, you're just going to select that source, the destination, scope, and settings. I'll go ahead and select one for an example real quick. And here is where you're going to actually create the mappings. It's going to go ahead and scan those environments if it has the correct permissions that they're still active. You can go ahead and grab all these and you can just drag and drop it from the source to the destination, as well as we have the import mode. You can add them manually here. You can just add the source, exchange, and then the destination. Select the destination type. User mailbox, group mailbox, shared mailbox, resource mailbox, or what you want that to be in the destination. As well as we have an export import option. If you click export here with a source and destination email already in here, it'll go ahead and just create a template for you so you know exactly where everything goes. And then you can import that back in here and it'll add them all for you. Beyond that, you will come here, and this is where you'll select the settings of your job. You have the option to name your plan. A lot of people like to put source dash destination, that way they know what's going from, or if they're doing smaller migration, depending on how big of a migration you're doing. We like to recommend different mapping sizes depending on what exactly you're running the server on. So for example, I've seen some people do bigger migrations all in one job, but a lot of people, it just makes more sense to break down into like 10 to 15 mappings per job. So you could do like letters A through H or something like that. Put in the plan name, as well as we have our migration policy. This here is where we control a lot of what goes on within the migration policy. Within the migration itself, you can create a migration policy and just save it. You have a name, description, conflict resolution. That's pretty much what's going to happen versus source and destination. This is generally less utilized for Exchange migrations and much more utilized for SharePoint Online, stuff like that. For example, if there's going to be work in the source and destination, what do you want to be overwritten? Do you want to merge from the container level or from the content level? Do you want it to be overwritten based off the last modified time? Which one's newer? Do you just want it to completely skip it if it's in the destination? Having those full options to control what happens in the source versus the destination to ensure what's going on, as well as filter and mappings. Do you want a filter policy? You can add a filter policy here. For example, a lot of organizations don't like the trash or deleted folder to be migrated just because many of them feel like they don't need it anymore depending on the organization themselves. As well as we have user mapping, we have column mapping, content type mapping, template mapping, and you can just get more specific depending on what you need to actually migrate and if you're having any issues with certain content from that source to that destination to ensure it comes over. Based on that migration database, depending on how you want to do the install, you'll have the option to do the migration database if you used your own. Most people prefer to use ours just because we have that Avepoint header in our migration database and it helps with the migration itself. A plan group, you can add this migration to a plan group, as I mentioned earlier. Essentially, if you have multiple different jobs that have like 10 mappings in them and you want them to run back to back, you can create a plan group over here. And essentially, you can add different jobs into that plan group. You can put a schedule and make them run at a specific time and then have them run one off, and just after that. As well as if you're doing it individually, you have that configure schedule here. So this will give you the options to do a start time, and that's going to kick off each daily job start time. This is on the daily tab, so essentially it's going to run every day. Depending on how you plan to do that migration in your organization, it's definitely a conversation you need to have within your organization. If you're just going to do like a one and done migration, I've seen plenty of people do those. They try to do everything in one migration and then maybe one incremental and then a cutover. And then you have people who have planned to do a migration over maybe a month or two, and they just want a daily incremental to run every single day. And then you can select that cutover, the last date before that cutover, and the time to make sure that last migration goes through right before you do the cutover. And a few other tools after that as well I'll get into that Scott mentioned yesterday, for example, the pre-migration report. But once you kick off that job, you come over here to the migration status, and this will kind of show you all the jobs that are currently running, what's going on, as well as you can fully see the actions that I discussed previously as well. Rerun, when you click rerun, it's going to ask you if you want it to run a full or an incremental. Generally, if you have some kind of issue, you can just run like an incremental and only do those failed items. And you have the view details that I showed you earlier in the PowerPoint. Number of successful objects, failed objects, status, comment, total size. And this is the option where you get that more information as well as the download the details and logs. I have a quick example here for you as well what this will look like. Once you download those details and logs, you should come over and you'll get an option with the job report and the log folder. The log is where we can get more information, as well as the job report, just kind of see the best summary. From summary page, you can see every single thing that we saw in the actual view details, but a little more information as well here. So you have the comment, what went wrong with the job, finish with exception. You can see the number of successful items, failed items, skipped items, filtered items. For the skipped items, generally that's just information that's already been migrated and doesn't need to be moved again because it hasn't been changed since the recent incremental. And any failed objects, you can find more information exactly what happened there within the object details page itself. I'll go ahead and bring that up. And then you can get more information on that one item or however many items failed. You can see exactly what it was. It was public folders that failed, and there were no available public folders on the servers. So if you select actual migrate the public folders and there aren't any, it'll come back as an error just showing that it finished with an exception. So that's just kind of one thing I wanted to bring up as well. Beyond that, once you finish that, we have our Fly Assist tool here. And this is more for post-migration and you're doing that cutover, and you want the profiles and the customers themselves emails are using to switch over to the new emails. You can use this tool. The first thing you're going to do is configure the connection, which is the connection to the manager. So you want to make sure the end users that you plan to install this machines on can reach this manager. So you're going to go ahead and put in the host name and the port, which 2100 is our default port. So you can go ahead and add that here. And then next thing you'll do is you'll go ahead and Fly Assist setup file, and you can download that. And then you can have those end users download this manually, or you can go ahead and push it out via group policy. And then as they're installing it, you can see which machines already have it installed. And you can set up the profile email address from the source to the destination. This was their source email, this was their destination, and you can set up a specific time to cut over from the source email to the destination email. And once that is scheduled, the next time the user goes to log in, it should pop up asking for their credentials, and from there we'll switch over. And you can see the status of what's going on here, waiting to configure. So once I configure that, I go ahead and set that up and run it based off schedule, or I can go ahead and just do it manually from here. And then here is the pre-migration report that Scott discussed yesterday. This is where you can kind of scan your actual environment, see what's going on. You can select the different scopes you have here based off of what you create in the connection manager and add that to a scope in here. For example, we have Exchange. We can see in this tenant there's 53 mailboxes, and the total size of mail is 0.09, as well as the size range for the different emails here. For example, we have Sharepoint. You can see the different site collections. You can see the different sites, lists, libraries, items, and documents, and all the different stuff within that Sharepoint environment, as well as you can actually export a detailed report of this, and it's going to give you much more information that you just see here. It'll break down every single item, what's supported to be migrated, what's not, and why. So if there's like a specific custom web part or something along that won't be able to migrate it, then you can find out that information in here, and then just figure out what you need to do to get that over, or if possible, to discuss with that organization. And that is the majority of our actual Fly product here. I can go ahead and just flip it over and open the bar to anyone who has any questions, as well as discuss more specific use cases. I know a lot of people want to know like best case scenarios and different things like that, as Marlene mentioned to me before this demo, from different size migrations, as well as how many mappings they can migrate at a time and different things like that based on your server usage. So feel free to ask any specific questions. I can provide you with any information I have, as well as reach out to any colleagues in the end to make sure if there's something specific to you, we can get to you, as well as have all your questions addressed.
Yes, we have a question here, Kyle. When mailbox from on-premise are migrated to Exchange Online using Fly, Outlook clients must be reconfigured to address them to Exchange Online services. Is there any tool included as part of Fly license to complete or minimize the effort of that part of the process?
All right, is that in the chat so I can reread that?
Yes.
I'm gonna stop sharing real quick just so I can see if I can see that question here. All right.
The question is from Hampshire. Oh, Marcelo, thank you. Marcelo Hans.
Yeah, so configuring that mailbox in Outlook itself, that's what that Fly Assist tool would be for. So essentially, you would download that, and that would connect back to the manager, and you can flip that from their old previous Outlook profile to the new one.
Did you get that, Marcelo? Can you repeat, Kyle, the answer?
Yeah, that last Fly Assist tool here that I was showing a moment ago. So essentially what this is for the actual Outlook profiles. So this would actually switch it from the previous Outlook profile to the new one. So you'd be configuring that within Outlook itself. When they download this, this will actually swap from their previous on-premise profile to the new online profile through Outlook.
Okay, thank you, Kyle. He says okay.
All right, do we have any other questions?
Hi guys, good morning. I put in the chat a couple of links of YouTube how this works, Fly Assistant. And if it's possible to watch these videos, could be a good idea.
Thank you, Marlon. It seems like we don't have more questions. Carl, you can continue.
So yeah, I covered majority of the product here. I figured we'd have more questions on like use cases, so I tried to add some more time into that. I don't know if there's any parts of the product that you would like me to go over more in detail, or if there's anything else that I could go over, but that's a majority of our actual Fly product. I mean, it's a pretty simple Fly migration, so. So one thing I can go ahead and go over is just some of the different migration types, from Exchange migration to Gmail migration and hosted Exchange migration. Let me go ahead and see here.
Maybe someone who already used the tool can explain on the experience and to see if we can answer any question, or if he can share with us some practices.
Or maybe Kyle, if you can explain us how to reduce or avoid or try to get a better performance when Microsoft or Google is applying throttling. Maybe I think it could be a important.
Yeah, I can go over some of that, as well as I was about to discuss the differences between on-premise Exchange, hosted Exchange, and Gmail Exchange, because there's differences in between each one, especially when setting up the sources. Sometimes it'll ask, if it's not able to connect the first time, it'll ask for the web host access server as well, when you go to add that in the source. As well as the Gmail, like I said, there are pre-requirements that you have to set when doing up that original source within there, and ensure that you're able to get access for Imap migration a lot of times, as well as making sure you're able to get that port number and putting in that private key for setting up the source, as well as the throttling that you mentioned. That can be different from tenant to tenant, especially when going from Office 365 to Office 365. One thing I've seen a lot of success in from reaching out to clients is making sure, A, you have an app profile, B, a lot of them will go ahead and reach out to Microsoft while doing that migration, and letting them know the source and especially the tenant that they're going into, as well as then they're able to decrease and sometimes even open up throttling for 30 days, depending on what's going on. I know they've had more trouble with the pandemic going on currently, just because so many people are working from home. There has been a lot of different throttling issues. So that's one thing you'll definitely want to make sure in a time like now that you're able to reach out to Microsoft and just kind of prepare them and let them know what you'll be doing into the destination tenant, just so they can open a little more throughput there. And then one more thing I'm going to bounce back to on hosted exchanges. A lot of times customers do have issues getting source credentials with the correct privileges just to do a regular migration. But that is one thing you are able to do if you do reach out to that hosted exchange. Like GoDaddy, for example, I had a customer I was working with today. He had to reach out to GoDaddy and get the explicit permissions because we have a role in Exchange called application impersonation, and what that does is when going from the source to the destination, it allows that service account to actually access the other source mailboxes to move that information over. That's one thing you want to make sure you're able to get. But one workaround if you're not able to get those permissions is just doing an Imap migration. It's one thing, as well as one thing I'd also like to address is just things to know before actually doing the migration yourself. Once you get that license as well, I think before you do an entire migration is you have to make sure you have those mailboxes set up in the destination. So you'll want to go into Exchange and just set up the mailboxes you'll be migrating to. You can go and create those users and make sure they have a mailbox by creating them a mailbox via PowerShell or just assigning them via license. That will automatically create them as licenses. A mailbox as well. Beyond that, the way our product actually works is essentially what you're going to do. What it does is it actually backs up all the source information to the agent. So you're going to make sure you have enough space on the server, virtual machine, desktop, or wherever you actually have Fly installed. You make sure you have enough hard drive space just for a temporary file, because it'll go ahead and back all that up there and then restore it to the destination. And once that migration's done, that space will no longer be used on that server, but you just want to make sure you have that space there for the migration.
Okay, Kyle, do you have some special tips or recommendation before to do an migration, or meanwhile you are doing the migration?
Can you repeat that question, please?
Do you have a special tips or recommendation before to do a migration? A special recommendations or tips to,
Gotcha.
to use?
Yeah. So before doing the migration, the main thing, a migration is it can be a big process depending on what you're migrating, how many mailboxes. So I would just go ahead. First thing, you want to find out how much data you're migrating, how many mailboxes or how many sites or site collections. Kind of prepare to have that space there on that hard drive. Beyond that, you want to make sure you have all the service accounts and permissions that you need, and you want to make sure those service accounts have administrative privileges and any impersonation roles that they may need, or exchange roles, depending on what type of migration you're doing. As well as we have all this information in are guides you get when you actually receive the product. So you really want to do like a permissions check, because a majority of failed jobs or any issues generally do have to do with permissions when actually running that first job. Do we have any other questions?
Kyle, maybe because we reserve the time with the resellers, maybe we can do a recap of the process just to make sure that everybody have the process clear. So maybe we can clarify some concepts or questions that they may have.
Yeah, let me go ahead and share my screen back out real quick. Go ahead and start from creating a plan one more time. As well as this time we can actually do a Sharepoint migration just to go over something a little different, since we already went over the exchange process. So from here, go ahead and pull this back. So for this, you can see, other than the mailboxes, we also have the site collections, OneDrives, within the SharePoint, as well as if we go back, we could also do groups to teams.
Hello,
And I can
Kyle?
also show, yeah, sorry. And I can also show you the groups to teams. For example, Microsoft Teams. As well as go ahead and you could do add mapping, import, as well as, and then we also have our auto map feature, which we go ahead and just grab everything from both the source and the destination if they're already created there. Go ahead and put in the source email address here, destination team name, as well as the destination team email address, and this will go ahead and create that mapping. For example, I go ahead and click auto map here. It'll go ahead and grab the source, create it in the destination if it's already not created. These have already been set up, so this is created. You can see, for example, here you have the all mappings, single match, multiple mappings, errors, as well as any that actually created new. For creating the plan name, pretty similar. Previously, you can go and put anything from the source to the destination, as well as just leaving default, and then we have the migration policy once again. For the groups and teams, it's pretty similar here. You merge, skip for the container level, which is the top level, and then the content level itself, which we have overwrite, as well as the group mailbox options, the user mapping, and then everything from the properties. From here, we have the option to also do a configure schedule for the teams as well. You can do it, have the incremental run daily, or you can go ahead and just do a one-off, schedule that time, and then you click save and run if you want it to actually run at that time, or you can go ahead and finish if you want to run at that time, or save and run now if you actually just want to go ahead and kick off now, as well as advanced settings within our teams migrations. The option to only migrate the document library from the team sites. You can migrate the team planner, migrate team members, migrate team conversations. One thing you come into here as well is you can migrate the conversation as an HTML file. If you have this one selected, it will actually only bring over the HTML file in that selection itself, and it'll go ahead and just put that as a document in the team, and you can go ahead and pull that up if you need it, as well as you have the option to migrate both the HTML file and actually have the messages come over in that team itself. And that actually only brings over the messages themselves in the team. It doesn't do anything like personal chat from like user to user or anything like that. It's just the actual messages within the teams itself. For example, you go ahead and select that, as well as all conversations, or just conversations within the last 12 months. Just for an example, I'll go ahead and kick this off. And then generally when you run migration, it'll go ahead and ask you if you want to run the full set or an incremental. Once you kick that off, this will actually take a few seconds for the job to pop up, and it will take you directly to that migration status for the migration type that you are doing. Give that a minute to come up. Yep, and from here, this job will go ahead and start. You'll have the in progress feature, the plan name. You can come back here and check the mappings if you need to, and the status, as well as view details here. Another thing, I can go back into Exchange Migration while this runs. The one thing I'll briefly cover as well is if you're doing an Imap migration, you go ahead and select the mail type. You'll have the server name, so essentially this will be, if you're actually accessing the mail, you should be able to see that at the beginning of the name, or you can actually grab it from the provider's site themselves. For the types, we have Gmail, Yahoo, Outlook, others. For the majority of the hosted Exchange jobs I've seen, generally it's going to be others, but we do have the other options here as well. And then if SSL is enabled, so you don't actually have to create a full connection if you're doing that Imap migration there, you just enter that information here. Then I'll go ahead and go over this Exchange migration one more time. Select your source and your destination. So one more thing I'll go ahead and hit one more time is the mappings. Personally, I recommend, as discussed earlier, depending on your different specs, how many mappings you have kind of slows down or speeds up the job. So I like to put in 10 mappings into a job, as well as if you run into any issues. It makes it a lot easier to actually investigate those, because you can just hop right into the job report and just see exactly what's going on with those individual items. So I generally recommend 10 here. Once again, you have that import and drag and drop option to do manually. You can drag it here, drop it, and then you can see that one mapping has been configured. You could do multiple and keep it up. It'll keep showing you how many mappings you have, as well as you can select here. You can see the mailbox type, the mailbox, the destination mailbox type, as well as that. Here you can edit or go ahead and delete any mappings that you don't want in the job. Go ahead and go to next. And then I know, once again, we also mentioned throttling impacts on how throttling can be a big issue in jobs. So one thing you want to make sure, another thing that helps is having those 10 mappings, having smaller jobs, generally using service accounts that aren't actually being used, currently worked on in the source or destination, especially if in Office 365. Using those service accounts while they're actually working on the migration can slow it, as well as especially times like right now. Once again, we're in the pandemic, that will actually decrease the speed just because how many people are purely working on Office 365. So they've kind of decreased their throughput a little bit, but definitely make sure you reach out to Microsoft and let them know what tenants you're working on that migration with. Then I can go ahead and go into a little more in the advanced settings here. So for example, we have synchronized deletion. What this will do is essentially if you delete something out of the source, do you also want that deleted out of the destination itself? That's definitely one thing you want to make sure you know what that end user's organization wants. Some people want things that they deleted out of the source also deleted the destination, as well as there are other ones that are just like, go ahead and everything that's currently in our source mailboxes, I want it all migrated over. So that you can definitely look into that, as well as be able to migrate those mailbox permissions, public folders, global contacts, and mailbox rules. And one thing we kind of showed earlier is if you actually select that public folders, and there are no public folders in that source, it will show up as an exception in the destination. So if you select that and you know there aren't any public folders or you're not sure, just expect that to be an end result. That's a possible one exception in that job. And I can go ahead and kick this one off now as well. And then one thing we can also kind of discuss is Exchange Online and Office 365 has very different policies and no way to work around from API perspective. So if you see too many different server busy errors when you're running a migration during business hours, that means your tenant's being used to its full potential. Microsoft generally recommends that you run the migrations during office hours. Regarding throttling Microsoft, or putting jobs to quarantine to block them if they see high resources from any specific connections over and over again. That's what the throttling generally is referring to. So they're kind of just like decreasing that throughput when they're seeing so many actions in that tenant. Every tenant in Microsoft Office 365 has throttling policies applied. They are to be split of each other in shared environment. So for your client, you can tell them to reach out to Microsoft to support to temporarily just reduce the throttling policy they have in place. Microsoft generally won't change them forever. The policies generally limited to a specific time. Generally, it's technically 90 days, which Microsoft assumes that migration will be completed. From what I've seen from my end users, they'll generally do it for 30 days, but we'll do it up to 90 days. And when Microsoft asks for which parameters need to be reset to unlimited on EWS inbound calls, the three main ones are EWS max burst, EWS recharge rate, and EWS cutoff balance. And I can also put those in the chat once I'm done sharing my screen as well. Do we have any other questions here in regards to throttling, the setup of Exchange or teams or groups or anything like that?
Let me see. I don't see more questions in the chat.
Kyle, when you are using Imap or POP3 protocols, it's possible to run a pre-migration report to get information in the source of emails, or only works with environments like Office 365 or Gmail?
Can you repeat that question again, please?
Sure. When you are using a migration with Imap or POP3, it's possible to run a pre-migration report, or only works with environments like Office 365 or Gmail?
So from what I've seen, that generally depends on that actual permissions of the service account you have, because you're going to need to be able to set up that connection for the connection manager to have. If you're able to actually set that up, it's possible to run it, and I've seen it successful. But a lot of the times they won't give you that permissions. That's why they're going to end up running that Imap migration. So a lot of time you won't be able to. But most of the time, those those hosted exchanges have in their actual portals how much mailboxes you have and how much actual mail is stored in there. And that's what for Exchange most of the time we're grabbing anyway. So generally, if we can't grab that, a lot of times the hosted exchange will be able to provide you with that information.
Okay, thanks.
We have another question, Kyle. It's from Ayrton. He's part of our pre-sales team. The Avepoint virtual machine available in the Azure Marketplace, what do you get with this configuration?
Let me see here, one moment. So essentially, when you get that VM, it already has Fly installed for you. So essentially, you just need to purchase it and go ahead and apply that license, and you'll be good to go. All right, and any other questions regarding to our Fly product? I know we covered everything faster than 2 hours than we planned, but just want to see if we have any other questions or anything else that you'd like me to go over while we're here and have the time.
Hi, Kyle. Ayrton here. How are you doing?
Doing well. How are you doing?
Locked in, but I'm good.
Yeah, I understand that.
Right. We saw two instances, at least one instance of a reseller. After they set up the migration plan and kicked it off, they just did it with 5 seats, 5 users, 5 mailboxes, and we realized it ran for roughly about 3 days. That's what they indicated. We figured it might have something to do with throttling, but there were some little minor errors that we saw as well in terms of not being able to move certain files over. How is that handled? How are these little minor errors handled during the migration process? Do we have to do another pass, or what would you recommend in cases like that?
Yeah, so sometimes certain things won't come over due to throttling. Generally, one thing you can do instead of going ahead and running a full job after that is I'd just wait till after hours and then go ahead and run an incremental, and that incremental should go ahead and pick the rest of those items that weren't able to make it up from that throttling over. A lot of that depends on the size of the job. That's another reason we do highly recommend breaking down those mappings into smaller jobs and then just running the jobs back to back, like the 10 mappings. That way there's just less use and less going through that pipe at the same time. So beyond breaking down the mappings to 10 mappings and running an incremental after hours, that should make a big difference.
All right, given what you just said a while ago, what would be the best practice in terms of how much data you need to be doing that in each pass? Would it be 1T or 500 gigs? What do you recommend?
So it's kind of hard just to break it down with just data because there's a lot of science behind it. So based off throttling, there's different usage within Office 365 and each action's taken by each service account. So from an example, you're backing up each item and then restoring it. So it's not just the size, but each action that's taken in each call, which breaks down to how much is going through, how many items. Do you have, like, it could be multiple large items but only a small amount of items that are just bigger in size, or it could be millions of items that are super small. So even if that item list is smaller, like it could be a couple gigs, but if it's millions of items going through, that's going to slow that down. So it's kind of hard to give you an exact approximate size because there's different item counts and different times and how much the pipe's actually open for you to migrate items through.
Okay. So this is just a little out of the box in terms of best practice, because I think what was indicated yesterday by Scott, if I have the name correct, when you're doing the migration, what's the best migration strategy that a reseller should take for an end customer? Should they prepare the destination environment, migrate before moving the domain over to the destination, and how would they handle any mails that came into the source after you've done the migration? Or what would be the best way to sequence the activities in the whole migration plan? So yes, we're using Fly, but the overall migration plan from source to destination, do we cut off from the source, redirect on the destination, and then migrate from the source? How do you do? What would you recommend? The cleanest approach.
Yeah, so based off of what I've seen people do it many different ways, but probably the cleanest, quickest way is go ahead and add that domain through the Office 365 tenant. You don't actually have to switch over and actually use that domain. You can go ahead and keep using the on Microsoft until you're ready to switch over. Do your full migration, your last incremental. And then once you finish that last incremental job, you can go ahead and just go into Office 365 add users, click the edit, like just check all the users that you migrated, and then just actually switch the domain over. So you already had that domain in there and you're literally just switching from the .on Microsoft to the new one.
Right. Okay. I had asked a question of Scott yesterday as it relates to GoDaddy, but moving from, say, Rackspace, the hosted mail solution, have you noticed any peculiarities or anything that resellers need to look out for if they have to move from any sort of syndicated hosted solution?
So from coming from a hosted solution, I've definitely seen a lot of that. Probably the same thing that I mentioned earlier. The biggest issue when coming from hosted providers is just being able to get those credentials that have the application impersonation role, because that's essentially what allows that service account to be able to act as the other users that it's migrating. So if your biggest battle there is getting that service account, but if you're able to get that, you should have no issue. And then if not, there are different workarounds to do that, such as doing an Imap migration, or depending on the migration size, I've seen people even create each user as a service account pretty much, and then
Right.
just migrate them one by one.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Kyle.
Problem.
All right, Kyle, I don't see more questions in the chat. I'm gonna put the email from the group, the sales team from Incomex Cloud, so you can send any question you may have, or if you are interested in the solution, if you want to have a proof of concept, just send us an email and we can arrange a meeting with you directly, okay? It's ventascloud@incomex.com. If you also want to have a session like this in Spanish, you can also let us know. Please send us an email and request to have a conversation in Spanish with you, and we'll be more than happy to do it. Thank you, Kyle, for all the interesting information and the approach of the migration tool. We will continue doing sessions like this so we can cover all our resellers and MSPs in Latin America and the Caribbean.
Thank you for the time today.
Thank you all. Have a good day and stay safe.
Have a great one. Bye.
Bye, Tim.
Likewise.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Adios, ciao.
Bye, Ayrton. Thank you. Thank you, Marlon.